my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and my original plan was to become a psychologist. And you know, going to school and then getting a degree in psychology, unless you go on and get your PhD, you can't be a psychologist, right? So of course I decided to work for a couple of years first, and the first company that I worked at had an opportunity in human resources, and they were actually starting a training function. They didn't have that part of HR as of yet. So they asked me to be the coordinator, and after about a year or so, they really needed someone to start doing training. And I said, I could do that, you know. I've pretty much been on stage since I was about 4 years old, so public speaking and being in front of an audience. Of course, when I was a kid, it was tap dancing or singing karaoke or whatever that might be. But being in front of people was always something that came very naturally to me. So I said, you know, get me the training for Train the Trainer, and I'll be the trainer of all these different things. And so that's, you know, back almost 20 years ago. But if we fast forward then, I started with Mizuho Bank about 5.5 years ago. And I've worked pretty much in financial services almost my entire career. Prior to Mizuho, I was with Citibank. Prior to that, I was with a division of One Beacon Insurance, and before that was with Bear Stearns. And as you know, and being a technology person, I started off also at IBM. So went from the technology training into really corporate learning and development. And with Mizuho, it was a unique opportunity in that, number one, it was a global Japanese bank. And I had done some work in Asia and Europe and Latin America for Citibank, but this was now primarily focusing on Asia. And heading up learning and development for the Americas. So North America, Canada, Latin America are all my populations. They had no learning and development in place when I started there 5.5 years ago. They had an LMS, and that was it. A few classes you could take online, mostly compliance or regulatory things that were necessary for the bank, but no learning and development. So they came to me and they said, we need someone to come in and totally start grassroots, tell us what we need, build the learning and development function from the ground up. And I actually can say that I've been lucky enough, this was the second time in my career that I got to do this. When I worked for division of One Beacon Insurance, it was the same kind of situation. A little smaller subsidiary, about 600 people, but they had no learning and development. So they said, can you come in and can you build everything? And that really excited me. You know, one of the reasons I got into learning and development was I always saw it was the happy side of HR. It's the nice side, it's the talent development, it's the career opportunities, it's mentoring programs and succession planning, and it's not firing people or putting them on a warning or having to handle their benefit claims. You know, this is the nice side of human resources and developing others. And so coming to Mizuho, it was a great opportunity on a larger scale to build everything from the ground up. I came in and started off with doing, you know, my needs assessments across the different divisions of corporate finance and treasury. I pretty much, as I said, always worked in financial services, so I was very familiar with the different types of people. But figuring out what kind of learning they needed and what their highest priorities were was the most important first step when I got there in 2008.
What is the role of a CLO?
It's a multi-hatted role. You know, I think that one is obviously determining what the learning needs are of the population that you're dealing with. So really understanding from their point of view, these are where we have gaps and these are where we need help. And training or learning is not always the answer also. And sometimes people just say, well, just put them in a class or just teach them this or give them a book on it and they'll be fine. Sometimes that's a band-aid to what the real issues are. So I think you have to look at learning more from not just training and development and not just classroom or virtual or e-learning, but also from a talent development investment. What is it that we're trying to develop? What are the skills or the behaviors that you're not seeing right now that you want to see? What does success look like? What are the competencies that people need to have to be able to be successful in that role? It could be some technical competencies, like in banking. Do they need to know financial modeling? Do they need to know accounting? Do they need to know how to manage a balance sheet? But it could also be, do they need to be a good leader? Do they need to know how to coach and provide feedback? Do they need to know how to recognize people? You know, so it really depends on what the behaviors are that people are looking for, and then we figure out what the best solution is for that. So I think being the CLO is really being that partner with the business to say, okay, let's look at what you're trying to accomplish. What are your business goals this year, this month, the next 5 years? What are you looking to develop? How can we partner with you to help you with that? And sometimes learning is the right answer, and other times it's not.
Tell me, why did you choose to build your entire career in learning department?
You know, as I kind of said, you know, number one, I think that it's the nice side of human resources. You know, it actually did give me an opportunity to also use my psychology degree by doing things like working with personality assessments and different leadership assessments to see what are the behaviors that success looks like and how do we develop those. I've always naturally been a coach and a mentor to people. Those are programs that I've put in place at all the different companies I've worked at, but I love doing that. I love coaching people so that they can achieve the goals they want to achieve. And for me, the satisfaction and the passion comes from if I can help somebody get there. I mean, they're doing all the work. I'm just really facilitating or guiding them into a couple of different directions. And if I can be honest with them and give them real constructive feedback that helps them get there, then that's a huge win for me. I feel great about the fact that there are people that I now look back on and say, here's where they were, and here's where they've come to, and maybe I had like 10% to do with that. And that really gets me excited every day. If I feel like I'm making a difference in helping people achieve their goals, then that makes it worthwhile.
What do you think made you successful?
I actually, you know, I think one of the main things that made me very successful was the support system that I had in place. You know, my parents both worked very hard to be successful in their careers. My dad, as an example, started off as an assistant controller at the company that he worked for, his second job after college, and worked his way up to the CFO. And he always taught my brother and I that if you really want something, you have to work hard, you have to prove yourself, you have to earn your stripes, and eventually you will see success. Don't ever fake anything, don't ever lie, always take accountability for anything that you've done, and always recognize people that deserve the credit. And if you do that well and you show that you really are knowledgeable and you're going to work hard to get where you want to get to, you can be successful. You know, I'll tell you that having that kind of support system and having people, both of my parents say, you can be anything you want to be, really helped me. You know, and I see other people who don't have that kind of system in place, either at home or from friends, and it makes it a lot harder for them to build their self-confidence and feel like they can achieve anything. One of the things, too, is that my parents always said to me, you know, if you're having fun doing it, then you should keep doing it. But when it stops being fun, you got to move on to something else. I'll also say that my dad specifically was always a goals and objectives guy. So before going to college, I had the sit-down talk, and he said, you know, you're graduating high school now, and you're going to go to college in August, and you need to think about what your goals and objectives are. What do you want to be when you grow up? Where do you see yourself going? And, you know, that was at 18, was kind of a scary, you know, conversation. Like, how do I know where I'm going, and how do I know what I'm going to want to do in life? But I still remember that conversation, and I'll tell you that every Christmas, and I'm now 40 years old, but every Christmas still in my stocking, my dad writes me a letter of what he saw me accomplish in the previous year and what he sees me focusing on for the next year. So having that kind of influence, you know, is something that I share with people that I mentor, and I hope that they can have people in their life that will continue to support them and guide them towards the future.
Do you have mentors? And if so, how did they help you to shape your life?
Definitely my parents were my first mentors. But I would tell you, you know, my first job on Wall Street was working at Bear Stearns, and, you know, they haven't been in the greatest light the past few years. But that was a tough environment to work in, you know, working on Wall Street, working in financial services, being, you know, young and trying to prove yourself in that kind of environment was tough. And my boss at the time had been there like 30 years. So she definitely knew, you know, how to work in that environment, who the right people were. So she was great about introducing me to the right people, getting me involved in the right projects. She also was a really tough lady. And I will tell you that she taught me how to grow a thicker skin and how to be tough and not take things personally and things like that. And I think as a woman working on Wall Street, you have to be tough. But she also taught me as a manager what things not to do, because she was pretty tough on us as a staff. And I will tell you that a lot of the things and the things that she said and did I was like, okay, when I start to manage staff, I'm never going to do these things, and I haven't. So I took some of those lessons as like, okay, here's what not to do, but here's what to do. So she was a great mentor. My job after that, working for a Division of 1 Beacon, was the president of the company, I will tell you, who's still a friend of mine today, but this was the first company where I had to build a learning function from the ground up. He really had a lot of faith in me. I reported to the CFO, who reported to the president, and actually, I'm the type of person that if you're going to ask the questions and you want the feedback, I'm going to give it to you regardless of if you're one of my subordinates or you're the president of the company. If you don't want to know the answer, don't ask me, because I'm going to be honest. And we implemented a 360 feedback process to get feedback, and it was focused, specifically on leadership. So it was on the senior management all the way down to first line supervisors, but it was their direct reports completing it, plus some of their peers. And the president, most of his direct reports, who were the head of claims, the head of underwriting, the CFO, were afraid of him. And he was an intimidating guy, and they didn't want to, share their feedback from their 360 with him. And I remember him calling me up and saying, well, just give me their reports. I want to see their reports. And I said, well, I can't do that. We explained that this information would not be shared with anyone unless they chose to share it. He's like, well, I'm the president of the company, and if I want these reports, you're going to give them to me. So I said to him, well, I want you to think about what you're asking me to do. And I want you to think about it overnight. And if tomorrow morning you still want the reports, I will bring them up to your office and hand them to you with my resignation letter. And he said, you got to be kidding me right now. This is ridiculous. And I said, this is my integrity on the line. And I promised these people that this information would be confidential. So if you're asking me to break that promise, then I have no integrity here. No one will ever trust me again. And so why would I work here any longer? So I said, I'm going to hang up now before anyone says anything else that we may regret, and I'll call you tomorrow morning. And so I did, and he said, come up to my office. I said, should I bring the reports? He said, no. So he said, I got to tell you, you have a lot of guts to tell me, the president of the company, that you're not going to give me something that I'm asking for. He goes, nobody ever says no to me. But you did. And the fact that you did that, I actually think I could learn a lot from you. He goes, you can learn some things from me too, but I think I could learn a lot from you also. And from that point, I started coaching him. And he became one of my clients. And so I did learn a lot from him on how to manage business, how to deal with people, but he also learned a lot from me too. And still now, 10 years later, we're still very close. And he told me that I reminded him so much of his daughter that it was scary. But, those are the kinds of people that have influenced and mentored me. And, it's not just a one-way street. I think that we both complement each other.
What makes a great teacher?
The first thing you have to do is understand and know your audience. The more you can know about them before they come through the door, the better you are. Because then you can teach to their style, their level of expertise, knowing the knowledge that they already know before they walk through the door, and making sure that it's customized to what they want to get out of it. So I think that's the first step. If you can have that information, then I think that can make it a successful class. The other thing, though, is that, I feel like it also has to be engaging and entertaining. I've always said to people, if people clap at the end, you put on a good show. If they fall asleep, it's not a good show. Nobody's coming back to that class. They don't want to, that's not somebody they want to learn from. So I think it's building the relationships with the people so that they can feel like you understand them and you can connect with them. But it's also, it is entertainment, and if they're entertained and they're engaged, they're going to learn it rather than if they're bored or they're disengaged. So it's a combination. It's not easy, and everyone has different styles. One of the things that I do now is teach similar to like a Toastmasters internally, we do a Speech Masters Club. And every month we meet and I give feedback on people's presentation skills and how to engage and how to get people involved. And, they say to me, we want to facilitate like you do. And I was like, no, that's not the plan. You don't want to be anyone else. You need to be yourself. You need to find your niche, find what works for you. Comedy works for some people, it doesn't work for others. Storytelling works for some people, it doesn't work for others. So you have to find what works best for you and then use that to engage your audience. Some people are born with natural leadership qualities, and if they already have those, then they have the potential to be an even better leader because they're already ingrained in them. They kind of come in their DNA. Can leaders be made if they are not born that way? I think it can if they're motivated to want to be a good leader. So if they don't naturally have the skills, there needs to be the motivation there to want to lead effectively, to want to build good teamwork and a good culture that people want to work for. I mean, when we look at the statistics, 80% of the reason why somebody looks for another job is because of a poor relationship with their direct manager, right? So if I'm not making it a fun place to work, people don't want to work for me, they're going to go find another job, right? Of course, that affects our productivity, our profit, everything else in the business, right? And I think that, what is a good leader? First thing is anybody following you? Do you have people behind you? And are they behind you because you're dragging them along or because they want to follow you? And I think some of the essential qualities of being a good leader is, number one, being flexible and open, listening to your people's needs. And so you have to ask questions. Sometimes people say to me, well, people don't seem happy. Well, have you asked them why they're not happy? Have you asked them what their issues are? You got to find out. Well, if I ask that, what if I can't do anything to change it? Well, sometimes by just asking the question, it makes people feel like you care. I think the other big quality is that people have to trust you. They have to, if you say you're going to do something, you have to actually follow through on it. You have to keep the promises that you make. And one of my biggest pet peeves that I really appreciate in a leader, and I make sure that I always do, is to give credit where credit is due. Recognition, I feel, is extremely important. Not just good job today or giving a high five, but really explaining to people what they did that was above and beyond, why it's so important, and why I care about it, and why I would love other people to emulate that. On the flip side, you've got to give the constructive development needs as well. If you don't do that, you're giving a really disservice to your staff. And then you complain that they're not accomplishing the goals the way you want them to, yet they don't know what the issues are. So, at the end of the year, you give them their performance appraisal and say, well, you didn't do this as good as I expected you to, or you didn't seem as focused, or, well, what wasn't I focused on? What else were you looking for? What did you want to see? Some people won't even ask those questions, but it's our job as the leader to provide that specific feedback. If I tell people at the beginning of the year we're going to play football, and then I switch it halfway through and say it's basketball, I got to tell people it's basketball. They're not going to know what rules to play by if I don't tell them the game. So we need to be honest with people too. Not at this organization, not at Mizuho, but I was living and working here in the city during 9/11 as well, working for Bear Stearns at the time. And I will tell you that the way that the organization had to handle the crisis, we lost some employees, of course. It definitely was a wake-up call for me. I was downtown the day that it happened, and seeing the buildings fall and having to band together as a group of employees to even see if we were going to make it out of there was difficult. There are people that I still remember that I walked with, to a train station. We had people come in that were bleeding, that were literally had been blown out of their shoes. And as women, we always have extra shoes under our desks, right? So we were able to give these people shoes to put on. But it definitely was a wake-up call for me, because I will tell you that I was so focused at that point on my career and nothing getting in the way of it, and focusing on making the most money I could make and making the most out of my career and proving that I could take on more and more and more, and probably working 15 to 20 hours a day. And when I look at that now, and after 9/11, I said, wait a second, nobody is going to write on my tombstone that she spent 20 hours a day in the office. And is that the legacy that I want to leave behind? And it wasn't, and I actually decided after that, I need to really prioritize what things are important in life. And not that my career is not, but it wasn't the top thing anymore. It was also around building relationships and figuring out where I wanted to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What kind of plan did I want to set up? And so it was also looking at the big picture and saying, what are the priorities here? And where do I want to focus? And I think going through a situation like 9/11, a lot of people face that and say, hold on a second. Where do I want my life to be? If that was me today, would I have been happy, and would I have had any regrets of things that maybe I didn't prioritize or didn't make time for? So I definitely made adjustments. I don't work 20 hours a day anymore, I can tell you that, Russell.
What is the proudest moment of your life?
Probably having my son. He's 2, and I will tell you, I did not do the traditional way of having a child. At 38, I had decided that if I hadn't met the right guy, I was going to have a child on my own. And so I'm a single mother by choice, they call us. And so I went the route of doing it on my own and doing the research. And I turned 38 that March, and by April I was lucky enough to get pregnant the first time. 9 months later, on New Year's Day of 2012, my son was born, Nicholas, and he's a little over 2 now. And I get to come home every night and see that smiling face running at me at the front door, and can't wait to see Mommy again. I'm not saying he doesn't try my patience on occasion as well, but I would definitely tell you that when he was born, my mom was in the operating room with me and said it's a miracle, and it really was. To be able to share your life with someone else, put someone else as a priority for the first time, and anything else in the grand scheme isn't that important. You know, it's those kind of things that make you really realize what life's about. What makes it easy to be a learning organization is if you have the buy-in from senior management up front. You know, when I worked for the Division of One Beacon, our president, who I referred to earlier, was a huge proponent of learning and development. So it made my job a lot easier because he was already on board with it. And so the messages would come from him and his senior management C-suite team to the staff. So they would go and participate in the learning. So other people were like, well, if he's doing it and she's doing it, you know, I can do it too. At Mizuho, for instance, you know, as I said, there was a need and a passion for the learning that they were dying for it because it hadn't been there. So they were like, we really need this, we really need this. And finally, you know, it was coming about. Being a Japanese organization, you know, they typically moved a little bit slower than other American organizations I had worked at before. And I still remember that my general manager, when I first started, said to me, Jennifer, son, you want to run and we are crawling. You need to meet us in the middle and walk. And I said, okay, I get what you're saying. Well, I'm moving too fast, but I'll slow down a little bit. But at least the buy-in and support was there from him. Our managing executive officer that's been here in this location in New York for the past 4 years has also been a huge proponent of learning and development and being involved himself. So I think that when you get that support from the most senior people in the organization, it definitely makes the job easier. Can you do it without that? Yes, I think that you can, but you can do it in pockets, I think. You know, at Bear Stearns, it was definitely more in pockets that we made an impact from a learning and development standpoint. Certain groups were on board, other groups were not, so they felt like, this is not for me, I don't have time for this, I already know everything, you know, I don't need these kind of things.
Why is it important for companies to develop or build a learning organization?
If you're not gaining more knowledge and learning, you're going to fall behind your competitors. And so if you're not open to it, whatever that learning is, be it if it's something that we need to learn from a regulatory and compliance avenue or from a financial standpoint or from a leadership standpoint, but if we fall behind, people are just going to pass us by. You know, I mean, you look at certain organizations like GE, where Jack Welch came from, you know, they are known as a learning organization reputationally across the world. Probably a lot because of Jack and his books, but also from the company itself. You know, you hear about it and people know, oh, they spend a lot of money and time and resources on learning and development. You look at other organizations, they don't know so much. You know, people ask those questions. Do they have learning and development? What kinds of things are in place? So I think it's a culture that needs to sometimes be created, or sometimes it's already there. And then you need to have the people on board who want that. You know, I find from a lot of our more junior staff at Mizuho. So I also manage our summer intern program and our associate program from a learning and development standpoint, and they are eager to learn. They want it before they even walk in the door. I mean, we put them through a boot camp in the first 6 days of their internship, and then we have them go through different learning and development activities throughout the summer. And our associates that started, our first group really started last August, they wanted the training the first week they were there. It took us a little longer. We got it by October, but we did get it in place. And so I definitely see from the millennials that their passion for learning, and they want it, you know, social media-wise, they want it in 5 seconds, and they want it on their tablet right away. We have to keep up with that stuff, or people are, at least of the new generation, is going to say, why would I work at Mizuho? They don't have these things in place. I need an organization that supports learning and development from the get-go. And so we're trying to, you know, get to that stage and compete with the bigger firms. I think the first step was understanding the different business groups. You know, yes, I've worked in financial services, but now this was different areas of financial services, and it was specifically working for a bank that's headquarters are in Japan. So what's the connection between New York and Japan, or New Jersey and Japan? Also looking at, okay, a lot of the employees had been long tenured, so if they hadn't had learning and development for so long, what were the needs now? So finding that out from senior management, but then also finding that out from the lower level staff. You know, it can be at any level, and sometimes the needs are different, you know, depending on the group. Also, our operations group has needs that are very different from our corporate finance group, so there's a big mix. So I think first really having the conversations and finding out what do they think from their perspective are the needs. Then we also did some surveys, and then we looked at information that we heard in things like exit interviews. Why did people leave? What kind of learning and development were they looking for that they said Mizuho didn't have? We also looked at new hire surveys. What are people saying when they come in the door that they want? And so we took a lot of that data, and you know, when I first started there 5.5 years ago, you know, the big push was really on, you know, what I'll refer to as the soft skills, right? So the leadership skills, the individual contributor skills, like how to communicate effectively, how to listen effectively, how to present, how to write, business writing, things like that. And from the leadership standpoint, it was things like, how do I resolve conflicts? How do I coach? How do I provide feedback? You know, and a lot of that also, there's the cultural piece as well. We have a lot of expatriate staff that come from Japan for anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8 years that they spend here in New York. And so it's also getting them prepared with, okay, now you're going to have American staff working for you. How's this going to be different from Japanese staff? So one of the major things, I guess it was probably almost 5 years ago, that was customized and designed and implemented by myself, was creating a cultural awareness class. So you're coming in and you now are going to deal with a completely different culture. What are the differences? What are the similarities? Why do certain things happen certain ways? And so just making people aware of that help them work better together, help them communicate more effectively. But without knowing that, and without having any experience dealing with different cultures, they didn't know. So we actually work that now into our new hire process. So now everyone within their first 2 months goes through this course to help them adjust to life at Mizuho.
How do you manage the individualized learning plan for each of those employees? I believe over 1,000 employees.
In the Americas, yeah. So that's not easy. We do have a full performance management system in place. I will tell you, up until this year, it was not automated. Thank God it finally is now. With a push from human resources, we actually moved on to a platform called Success Factors. We use the vendor Success Factors for the actual product, but our competencies, our forms, everything that we use for our staff was customized for Mizuho, really by other members on the HR team that looked at what are the competencies that we want from our employees, and so then of course we have to work that into our rating system. We introduced it, our fiscal year goes April 1 to March 31, so last March we introduced our new online platform. We've had performance management in place for, you know, of course, forever, but we've always updated what are the competencies now, you know, what are the goals and objectives. And so we've really tried to put together a robust program that says, okay, when you're thinking about your goals for the year, think about not just your individual job and your goals and your role, but also how does that fit into your division, and then how does that fit into Mizuho as a whole, and set your goals that way. And then when we look at the competencies, we looked at, okay, an individual contributor versus a manager of staff, what are the competencies that we want to see? And so the appraisal is actually broken up 50% goals and 50% competencies, so it's weighted pretty evenly, not just what you do, but how you do it. So we're trying to send that message too, that even if you're the biggest producer and you do such a great job at the goals that you're trying to attain, you also have to not alienate people and steamroll people. You have to do it in a way that respects others and that shows teamwork and supporting the culture and customer service and things like that. So it's a combination. So each employee has a set of goals that they set with their manager in the beginning of the year. And then we have a mid-year process, so it's a mid-year check-in where the manager will sit down with the employee and see how they're doing. And then at the end of the year, we have a full appraisal that looks at how did you do throughout this year, and what are your strengths, what are your development areas, and what are your goals for the subsequent year. Now, I will tell you that, you know, obviously that's done across the board, but we also put in place a year and a half ago a high potential talent program. And that's a program that we in HR really were the pushers of the program. The business was very interested, but it did come from us rather than coming from senior management, which has its advantages and disadvantages, but senior management got on board, and we have about 25 people in that program that my team and I actually work with individually, coaching those people, designing individual development plans for each of them. We also put them through different assessments through Connexa, now IBM, that were leadership simulations and assessments to look at where are the gaps from a leadership perspective. And these are people that are not just high potentials in their current job, but people who senior management sees as having the potential to be the future senior leaders. So high potentials, but also succession planning kind of in one. And we purposely targeted people who were kind of in the more junior range, like maybe 3 to 5 years experience up to like maybe 10 to 15 years experience. So they're kind of in the middle. So there's more room for them to grow and develop, not necessarily always vertically. We also kind of look at, we're a global company. Are there opportunities in London, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong for these people? And so we're the advocates for them. We're really working to support their development, but we can't do that for everybody. So we have about 25 people that are in that program. We're also we partner with our head office in Tokyo on global programs. So right now, a program that we're working on is our most senior positions are general managers. And so what are the competencies to be a general manager, and what would it take to be in that kind of role? So typically in the past, most of those roles have always been filled by Japanese, but now the company is really making an effort to say, okay, yes, it can be filled by Japanese, but it could also be filled by people from America, from Europe, from other parts of Asia, or the Middle East. It could be somebody from anywhere. So let's look at our talent population across the board globally. Now that we have success factors in place, it makes it a little easier to see the talent across the board. And then let's look at how we develop each of those individuals to potentially get them to that most senior management role. So now we are starting to shift our focus to succession planning for the C-suite as well. When I went to IBM, I did not know how to use the computer, pretty much. So I was actually doing some corporate training before that, and the opportunity at IBM came along, and they had me do what we would refer to as a test teach, right? So you'd go on your interview, and after your interviews, you would then have to actually facilitate a piece of a course, right? So they gave me a book on, I think it was Windows or something, and said, okay, come back next week and teach us a chapter on Windows. I got through it, but I definitely was not an expert, I could tell you that. And afterwards, they were like, look, you were a great presenter and facilitator. You definitely don't know Windows, but we'll teach it to you. And so IBM really was good about investing in their people, in that we went through our Microsoft certifications, and they actually give you bonuses for every certification that you completed. And so, yeah, if you were going to go up there and teach Microsoft Project or Microsoft Access, you better really know it better than the people sitting in the room. So I went through all the certifications for the whole Microsoft suite so that I could get to the master level, and then taught all of those different softwares. So then how do you make the shift then back to corporate training, right? So actually Bear Stearns was a client of IBM's, and I used to teach Access over there, and I knew they had an opening, and I always loved the softer side of learning. And even though it's harder, I think, in a lot of ways to teach, because you teach somebody coaching skills, but then getting them to actually do it is a lot harder than saying, okay, I'm going to teach you Excel, and I'm going to teach you how to do a pivot table, and you're going to be able to walk out of here and do a pivot table. It's kind of black and white, versus, okay, now you need to coach and motivate your staff. Not as easy. The technical skills, I definitely went to classes and learned. The same thing with the softer skills. Some of it obviously you get on the job being a manager of staff. You kind of learn it trial and error. But I've also had some managers in the past that were very supportive of my learning. And so when I would say, look, I want to learn coaching skills. I want to go to a course on how to be a better coach. I want to learn how to do assessments like a 360 feedback or a leadership simulation. Can I go and get certified so that I can go to a train the trainer and be able to teach this stuff and implement it? Yes. And so, I would say that, obviously there's always, budgetary constraints here and there, but a lot of it, I haven't always worked for people that had a learning and development background, so I couldn't always learn from them because they didn't know. But they were good supporters, and when I would come into them and say, look, I'd really like to learn this, will you support me going, to Vegas for a week so that I can learn this? Yes. So there was that. So I've never really had managers who said, no, we're not going to spend the money, or no, you know enough. And, being the learning and development, the CLO, people are always coming to learn from you. So you have to always kind of look back, and being the lifelong learner, say, all right, well, wait, when have I gone to a class lately? When have I learned something? Have I done an e-learning or a virtual learning, or gone to an actual facilitated course, I need to do that. So I try at least 2-3 times a year, every year, to go to something so that I can keep my skills up to date too.
Why do you think it's important for organization to invest on employee learning and development?
It's a fair point. A lot of organizations do cut learning and development as the first thing when the economy's bad. We don't need to spend money on this. We don't need to invest in it. This is something that can go. It's a nice to have. A lot of companies see it as a nice to have rather than a need to have. I think that the way that the world is now, that especially being in financial services, if you don't keep up to date with the regulations or with the financial training, and then of course having good leaders who can support people in doing those jobs, if you don't keep people in place to make sure that they're getting that education, you're going to flounder. Look at Lehman Brothers, and a lot of the training and development events that I go to are for financial services people. And what I'm hearing now is this is where they're making the biggest investment in learning and development, because they don't want to go through what we went through in 2008 again. And they don't want people to be making mistakes. Risk management is huge now. Compliance is huge now. There's a lot of training that has to get done to make sure people understand that stuff. It may not be the sexiest training, but it's necessary. And again, if it protects the bank, it protects the company overall, then people need to make the investment. Sometimes they forget about the leadership skills and the other skills, but it kind of goes hand in hand. You may want to do the hard skills first, but then you've got to get people in place to support those hard skills from the soft skill perspective.
How do you define learning?
There is a difference between learning and training. I think that training is really more of teaching a skill that you want people to be able to do when they walk out of the room or after they go through a virtual activity. I think with the learning, it's not necessarily like, here's the book and here's the steps and here's what I need you to do when you leave here. It's also around trial and error. It's also around relationships that you build. It's also around mistakes that you make. And how do you recover from those mistakes? And what would you do differently? So it's kind of taking the look back and saying, okay, what did I learn from that? Somebody actually just asked me recently, is there anything you would do differently? From a work perspective, if you were looking back on, your career, is there anything you would do differently? And, I think everyone always has some things. I probably would have, taken this project differently. I probably would have told this person these things. There's always like some things that you could do or you could say, but I think that learning is also being open. When I first started working in learning and development, I was very regimented, very set in my ways, we've got stuff we've got to get done, it's got to get done by this date, and I did not like when there would be a hiccup in the schedule. I was not fun to be around, my staff would run away, it was not fun. Over the years, I started to realize, there's not only one way to get things done, there's many different ways, and I think that it was learned behavior for me, because it was not natural, to be more flexible, to be more open, to listen more to others. Now, I don't always agree, and sometimes we're going to agree to disagree, or I wouldn't do it that way, I still don't think that's the way to go, but I'm willing to try it now. I've always hired people who were opposite style of myself, which people thought I was crazy. They're like, why wouldn't you just hire people just like you, because make your job a lot easier? I'm not looking for clones. I'm looking for people who are going to challenge me, who are going to push me, and sometimes it does drive me crazy, but there are blind spots that I know that I have, and the only way for me to learn is to bring people in who have strengths in those areas so that they can challenge me, they can bring different things to the table so that I can learn from them too. So I think it's about being open and flexible, and I think it's that you can learn from so many different things. It's not just the formal e-learning or virtual classroom or webinar or instructor-led class. Like, that's what people see as traditional training, and I think the push has been much more towards talent development and towards organizational development, and not necessarily is that going to be a agenda with 6 checkpoints of what you need to learn. It's sometimes just getting people together in a room to build relationships. Have a drink, or let's do a book discussion, or let's get people together for a party. And that sometimes is where people learn to depend on each other, learn to reduce conflicts, learn to work together and build relationships.
What motivates people?
You have to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table, right? My motivation has always been being happy. Are you having fun? And I think that people are having fun if they're in an environment where they feel like they're adding value. They feel like they're making a difference. They feel like they are the expert. I like when people come to me and say, oh, you're the chief learning officer, you know this stuff, what kind of learning do we need? Sure, I like having the mastery. I like decision making, the autonomy is huge. For me personally, motivation has always been around, am I having a good time? And if I'm having a good time, I am gonna stick with it and keep trying to make change happen, keep trying to implement new things. I will tell you, people ask me, why'd you leave from one job to another? Why'd you do those things in the past? A, it was always for a bigger opportunity. But B, the job that I was at, I wasn't having a good time at anymore. Either, I was bored, it wasn't as challenging as I wanted it to be, I felt like I did everything I could do there, or the organization was starting to take steps back or slow down or not invest in learning as much as they had, whatever it might have been. But I like the challenge. And that's what gets me motivated. And I do think that you can motivate people by giving them those opportunities, and I think that you also motivate people by recognizing them for that. Not sugarcoating it, not saying, oh, you did such a great job, you're the best, when they're really not. Give me the real feedback, give me the honest feedback. If it's negative, people can handle that too, and they'll appreciate it more that you told them than if you lied. I'd rather be honest with people about what's positive and what's negative. And then they can grow from that if they choose to. I always tell people that feedback is a gift. If you ask for it and you choose to take it, it's someone else's perception. So the question is, do you care about their perception? If you don't, then you stick it on a shelf and you do nothing with it. If you do care, if you think maybe there is some truth to that perception, then you got to do things that you've got to take on yourself to make a change, to change that perception. Because we can't change other people, but we can change ourselves so that their perception may be different then.
Jim Collins always says that people are not your most important asset, right people are. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is that how do you define right people?
I think obviously, people first look at what are the technical skills of the job, right? What kind of person, what kind of background do they have to have? What kind of experience do they have to have? But I think that's the least important piece. I think one of the most important pieces is how are they going to work within the team and within the organization? Each organization is different. Certain people's behaviors and personality will work well in one organization, it's not going to gel well in another organization. And if it's not going to, you're already setting those people up for failure or issues. So you really, during the interview process, I can say that I really appreciated at Mizuho, for instance, that my boss, when he interviewed me, was very honest about what the culture was, what they needed, what types of people I was going to be working with, what was going to need to be put in place that wasn't there. And so I went in very eyes wide open, knew what I was getting into. There's other places that I've worked and other people that have been hired that weren't told that. And so, then they come in and they're like, this isn't the place for me. And so I think, during the hiring process, you have to be very honest about the, look, every company has advantages and some disadvantages. And I think if you're honest with people, then they can make the determination whether or not that's the place they want to work. But if you're not honest, or you really want that person, so you tell them anything they want to hear, but then they start the job and it's not that job, what's the chance that they're going to stay too long? And now they don't trust you because you weren't honest during the interview process. So I think being honest and making sure that they're going to fit into the culture is key. I would say that's my top priority when I'm hiring people. I also do look for people who will complement my skills. On my team, I've got a very diverse group of people who come with different backgrounds, who come with different personalities, who come with different strengths that I don't have. And so that helps my team be even more successful. As a leader, you're only as successful as the people who are working with you. And if those are smart people who push and challenge and get things done, those are the kind of people that are going to make you look good too. But if you have people who, things fall through the cracks, they don't seem to be focused, they're not doing what needs to get done, that's going to reflect on you too. So I think that, you need to be honest up front, and you need to also manage the situations too. If there is an issue, you got to talk to the person right away. If there's something you want to see, you've got to tell them. And I always think that there's only two reasons why people don't do things. Either they don't know how, which is a lot easier to fix usually, you can teach them, or they don't want to. And if they don't want to, if the motivation's not there, unless it miraculously shows up, you're not going to get that person to change. And if they don't want to choose to do whatever the job is, then, I've actually had conversations with people where I've said, if you continue to choose not to do this, you're going to start to choose to not work here. So it's up to you. But I think, it's their choice. It's all about choices, and people have to look themselves in the mirror at the end of the day and feel comfortable with the choices they made. And if they feel comfortable with them, then that's the right choice for them. I think it depends on what we're learning. So, for instance, something like technology, if we want to learn how to use Excel or how to use Access, I think that you can learn e-learning. You can go through the steps, you can have, virtual learning or a webinar. You don't need an in-person learning for something that's more of a technical skill. I am still a big proponent of, if it is a leadership skill, you need to be either in a live webinar kind of situation or a live instructor-led type of situation. You can't teach somebody by clicking through screens in an e-learning how to be an effective leader. They can get some information, they could go through a little quiz, maybe watch a video, but that doesn't make them an effective leader. And for behavior change, I honestly think that if you really want the behavior to change, it's really got to be one-on-one coaching and mentoring for an extended period of time. Yes, they can come to a class and they can get some skills and they can hopefully take some of that and apply it, but there needs to be someone there reinforcing it, be it weekly, monthly, whatever it might be, to coach them and see, how are you taking these behaviors that you learned and implementing them? What kinds of actions have you taken? Checking in with their staff to see, have the staff seen a difference? So I think there are certain virtual things you can do, there's assessments you can do, there's simulations you can do, but for the behavior change to really happen, I think it needs to be the one-on-one coaching.
How can you build a team culture within your organization?
I think one of the essential things for it to be a successful team is that there has to be trust within the team. And trust not only from a business perspective that, if this is your role and these are your responsibilities that you're going to get it done, but also from a personal perspective. I tell you this or I open up about that, I expect you to, do the same in return or treat me the same in return. So there's that personal trust, and then there's also the business trust. I think with that, once you have that established, you can build on that. The dependability is there then. I know I can count on you. There's also, I've always said to my staff, look, if there's an issue, there's a problem, come to me first. Let me try and help you. Don't let me find out from the clients or from my boss that there was a problem. You need to tell me, keep me in the loop. And by doing that, we can also, fix it together. I think there also has to be, obviously we have multiple levels, there's junior people, mid-level people, senior people. I'm not really a title person, I'm more of, we're all on the same team. It shouldn't matter if I'm the head of learning and development and you're the administrative assistant. We're all doing this together. Everybody has a part in this. And so treat everyone from the janitor to the president the same way, and people will like working together more often. I've seen it, especially in Wall Street, many times, where people look at your title and say, oh, I'm not even going to talk to you because you're not at the level that I am. And that creates a dysfunctional team rather than, let's do this together, let's collaborate. And a little good competition is fun too. People like that too. Let's compete for the prize or whatever it might be. Not everybody does, but some people do. And I think, I remember that a lot of the great relationships that I've built were built after 5 o'clock. You built them when you went out and grabbed a drink, or you worked late on a project, you grabbed dinner together or something, and you get to know people on a personal level. And once you do that, you start to build a good camaraderie.
How do you measure learning outcome?
Yeah.
Do you have certain metrics that you use to define the success of the learning program?
So we do have some metrics. We look at the Kirkpatrick, levels. I would tell you that, we're probably still between a level 1 and a level 2. So at the end of each course, we do have, the typical smile sheet. However, we are also we look at a few different things. We look at that from the actual learning events. And then we also are looking at, okay, are they able to apply the skills back on the job? From the behavioral changes, it's harder to see, it takes longer time. Are they coaching better? Are they providing feedback better? We do a 360 feedback, so we do that annually. So we get to see, okay, well, you took these courses, you focused on these behaviors. Did your score go up on your 360? If it did, maybe some of the training correlated to that. Is it a direct correlation? Not necessarily. With the hard skills, it's a little easier. You know, you went through financial modeling. Are you able to do the models easier now? Are you able to forecast better? The managers can tell us, yes, they took that training. Now they're able to examine the credit more in-depthly. They're able to provide a more in-depth analysis. So we can see that a little bit easier. We also look at our exit survey data. You know, what are people saying about the training? Do they feel that they got the training they needed? Do they feel it was helpful? And, you know, if our scores increase on that, we know we're doing that right too. Of course, they're leaving at that point, but, you know, at least we're getting the feedback on how the training is working. And we look at our turnover data from that perspective. We also look at our new hire data as well. You know, what kind of training are they looking for? Did they get it within the first 90 days? And if they didn't, what do they need? And so now are we implementing things to address those needs? You know, one of the things that we needed was we really needed to bring in junior level analyst staff. Up until 3 years ago, Mizuho didn't have any of that here in the Americas. And so we decided that we needed to put in place a summer intern program that would then develop into hiring those people full-time after they graduated college as first-year analysts, first-year associates, and then we could build a pipeline of junior staff so that there would be people in place for the future development. We had mostly, you know, experienced people. So that was, you know, a push, and that was a change. And now we're seeing that grow and grow to add to that staff and develop that level of people too.
What advice do you have for a young employee or young person who wants to become the CLO of the organization?
You know, I think the first thing is that you know, when you're in college and you're going to your classes and then you have your breaks in the summer, you've got to do internships. You know, internships are essential now. If you want to get a job at a certain company or in a certain industry, a lot of it is going to depend on the relationships that you've built and who you know and how they can help you in the future. You know, I think part of being a chief learning officer has a lot to do with listening to people, understanding them, and building on the relationships that you start. I've gone through several different companies, but a lot of my success and a lot of what I've put in place, I can take from other organizations that I've worked at. Also, I have resources to reach out to. We want to do something new. We've never done it before. Well, let me call my friends over at this place or that place and see what they did. Who did they use? What kinds of things did they put in place? For instance, being that we are you know, most of our business is in extending credit to corporations, right? So one of our newest training initiatives is that we want to work better on writing of the credit application. Okay, I don't do credit training, but one of my clients in our credit department said, oh, well, one of our competitor banks is doing this credit training, and can we do the same training? I'm like, well, who are they using? Do you know? Oh, well, this is the name of the instructor. That's all they had. This was a week ago. I said, okay, let me do some research. So I went out, did some research online, found out about the person, did my LinkedIn connections, who knows this person, connected with the person, met with her yesterday, and, you know, potentially we'll put a program like that in place. But I think because of having the connections, because of knowing a lot of people in the industry, you know, it's funny, I went to an event Tuesday morning and you run into the same people, even though these are events that are tremendously large, but being in learning and development, even though it seems that every company has it and it's huge, it's still a small network, and the relationships that you build really are what can make you successful in rising to the top.